Her hair came out in clumps under the chandelier lights, strand by strand falling onto the marble floor in front of every executive, every colleague, every person she had ever worked beside. Kofi stood there smiling. His mother raised her glass. The woman beside him, the one wearing her perfume, laughed out loud. Nobody moved, nobody spoke, nobody helped her. The whole room watched her fall apart. Then she slowly looked up and smiled. Not a broken smile, not a nervous smile, the kind of smile that knows something the room doesn't. That was the moment the air changed. And for the first time that night, Kofi stopped smiling. The night started the way all dangerous nights do, quietly and with music playing too loud for anyone to hear what was really happening underneath. Meridian Tower stood 42 floors above the city, and on this particular Friday, its grand ballroom had been dressed in white and gold for the Elevation Gala, an annual event hosted by Vantage Group, one of the most powerful corporations in the southeastern United States. Every executive in the building had received the invitation. Every senior leader had confirmed their attendance. The room was full of people who believed they understood exactly where power lived and exactly who held it. They were wrong, but they didn't know that yet. Renee walked in at 8:47, a little late, wearing a deep navy dress she had picked out herself 3 weeks earlier. She was 34 years old. She had worked at Vantage Group for 11 years. Longer than most of the people in that room, longer than some of the managers who had passed her over, longer than the VP who had taken credit for her restructuring proposal in 2019 and gotten a bonus for it while she sat in the same chair at the same desk and said nothing publicly and filed everything privately. She had learned how to carry that kind of thing without letting it change the expression on her face. She had gotten very, very good at that over the years. The compass rose pendant sat at the base of her throat, gold and small, the kind of thing most people in that room would not notice unless they were paying close attention, which most people in that room were not. She had touched it once in the parking garage before she walked in, the way she always did when she needed to orient herself, the way her father had taught her. Her fingers had found it automatically without thought, the way fingers find things that have always been there. Kofi was already in the room. She saw him before he saw her, standing near the far end of the ballroom with a glass of bourbon in his hand, laughing at something the woman beside him had just said. His head was tilted back, his shoulders relaxed, his body language the language of a man who felt entirely comfortable, entirely at home. The woman beside him was Tiffany. She worked 2 floors below him at a consulting firm that did contract work with Vantage. She was dressed in something dark and tailored that fit her well and cost more than she should have been spending. She was wearing a fragrance that Renee recognized immediately, not because it was a common scent, but because it was her scent, her bottle, sitting on the dresser in the bedroom of the home she shared with Kofi. A bottle she had not finished and had not given away, and had not, until this exact moment, understood was being used by someone other than herself. She noticed that detail. She cataloged it the way she cataloged everything, quietly, without reaction, filing it into the growing record she had been keeping for months. She noticed Lorraine standing nearby in a cream blazer, holding a champagne flute, watching the room with the satisfied expression of a woman who felt entitled to every inch of the space she occupied. Lorraine had never once made Renee feel welcome in their family. She had done it so consistently and with such practiced subtlety that it had been difficult in the early years to name it. But Renee had eventually learned to name things. She moved through the crowd with the practiced ease of a woman who had attended hundreds of these events. She smiled at colleagues, nodded at people she knew from conference rooms and quarterly reviews, accepted a glass of sparkling water from a passing server. She was composed. She was present. She was carrying more than anyone in that room had any idea about. and she had decided months ago that she would carry it quietly and without performance until the exact moment arrived to put it down. She did not know, or did not allow herself to think about, what Kofi had done that morning. While she was in the shower getting ready for this exact evening, he had done something that he and Tiffany had been laughing about over text messages and phone calls for 2 weeks. He had swapped her shampoo. He had replaced the bottle she used every single morning, the bottle she had used without any concern for 11 months, because why would she have any concern for it? With a product he had ordered online under a search term he deleted from his history, decanted carefully into her familiar container, close enough in smell that she would not notice until it was working. Hair removal cream, concentrated, the kind designed to dissolve hair at the root level, the kind that worked in under 10 minutes. He had told himself it was just a prank. He had repeated that to himself many times in the days leading up to this evening. It was just a joke, just a little embarrassment. Nothing permanent, nothing that wouldn't grow back. He had said these things to himself and had stopped asking the more honest question underneath them, which was, what kind of man does something like this to a woman he married? And what does that say about who he had become? That question had gotten too uncomfortable to stay with. So he had let it go and laughed about the plan with Tiffany instead, and felt in that shared laughter something that passed for closeness. Tiffany had said it would be perfect. Lorraine had been informed the way Kofi always communicated unpleasant intentions to his mother, not directly, but through suggestion and implication, and the strategic omission of details that would have required her to object. She had understood what he intended, and had smiled and had asked no questions. That was how their relationship had always worked. And so when it started, when Renee, standing near the center of the room, felt something wrong on her scalp, something that was not quite itching and not quite burning, but was both and neither, when her hand went automatically to her hair and came away with more than it should have. None of them looked away. Kofi watched with his bourbon. His mother raised her glass in a movement so subtle it could have been mistaken for casual. Tiffany pressed her fingers to her lips, but did not quite succeed in hiding the expression underneath them. The room noticed. These things travel through a crowd in seconds, a cluster of eyes, a shift in attention, the social instinct that recognizes something wrong before the mind has finished processing what that thing is. Someone near the appetizer table leaned toward the person standing beside them. A woman in a red dress stopped mid-sentence. A senior manager from the finance division looked at the floor briefly, then looked at the ceiling, then looked anywhere except at Renee. The way people do when they are witnessing something that should be stopped and cannot make themselves be the one to stop it. Nobody moved. Nobody helped her. Renee stood in the center of all of it. She felt the heat of every eye. She felt each strand, the slow and public undoing of something she had not consented to, something that had been planned in the home she shared with her husband, by the man she had trusted with that home. She felt her scalp. She looked at her palm. The room went very still. It was the kind of stillness that arrives when a crowd collectively decides to watch something play out rather than intervene. Nobody stepped forward. Nobody said anything. These were professionals, people who had spent careers in institutions that rewarded the management of perception above almost everything else. And the institutional instinct was to observe, to assess, to wait and see how things resolved before attaching themselves to any particular position. So they watched. They watched with a mixture of discomfort and fascination, and the low-grade guilt of people who know they should act differently and choose not to. Then she looked up, and she smiled. It was not the smile of a woman who had broken. It was not the smile of shock or humiliation, or the desperate performance of dignity by someone who is barely holding themselves together. It was something older and steadier than any of those things. It was the smile of a woman who had known something for a very long time, who had been carrying it carefully and quietly through every betrayal and every slight, and every morning she sat across from a husband she no longer recognized, and who had simply been waiting for the right room to let it breathe. Kofi saw it. He saw it land across the room, and he did not know what to do with it, and the bourbon glass stopped halfway to his lips. For the first time that night, he stopped smiling. To understand Renee, you had to understand where she came from. Not the city, not the office with her name on the door, not the navy dress or the Meridian Tower or any of the accumulated evidence of her years of careful, determined work. You had to go further back than all of that. Back to Atlanta, back to a small house on Briar Creek Road where the kitchen lights stayed on late and a man named Walter sat at the table and read the paper while his daughter did her homework across from him, and the neighborhood was quiet outside the window. Walter Caldwell was not a loud man. He had grown up understanding something that he never put into words explicitly, but that Renee absorbed from the texture of living beside him, that certain men, black men in particular, had learned over generations that the safest and most effective way to build something real was to build it without an audience, not because they had anything to hide, but because visibility attracted interference, and interference was expensive, and he did not have the luxury of expensive mistakes. He had taken that understanding and turned it into a philosophy. He moved carefully through rooms. He signed nothing without reading it completely. He cultivated patience the way other men cultivated ambition, not as a temporary strategy, but as a permanent orientation. He let people underestimate him. He used that underestimation the way a navigator uses a current. You don't fight it, you account for it, and then you go exactly where you were planning to go while it spends itself on nothing. He had been building something since before Renee was born, had been building it through her entire childhood without ever announcing it, without dinner table discussions about assets or holdings or the name of the law firm in downtown Atlanta that had been managing the structure for decades. He had built it the way he did everything, methodically, privately, over time. She was 16 the first time he sat her down and placed the sealed envelope on the kitchen table between them. He told her it contained details about what he had been building and that she was named in all of it, and that she would inherit everything. He told her not to open it until she had built something herself, not until she had established herself through her own work, her own choices, her own endurance. He was not withholding it as a test of loyalty. He was withholding it as an act of love, because he had watched what inherited wealth did to people who received it before they knew who they were, and he did not want that for his daughter. She asked him how she would know when she was ready. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said she would know because she would stop needing to prove herself to anyone and start simply being herself, and those two things felt completely different from the inside. She had carried that with her for 18 years, through 4 years of college where she was one of very few faces in her program who looked like hers and had learned to be excellent not to be seen, but simply because excellence was the standard she had internalized from watching her father, through her first job at a small logistics company where her ideas were consistently appropriated by people with louder voices and more comfortable relationships with entitlement, through her arrival at Vantage Group at 23, where she had started as a coordinator and built her way upward, one careful, thorough, unremarkable seeming step at a time, through meeting Kofi at a birthday party when she was 26, tall, laughing, attentive in the particular way that people are attentive when they are genuinely interested, asking her real questions and listening to the answers and making her feel for the first time in a long time like someone was actually trying to see her rather than past her. She had believed in him. She had chosen him with her whole heart, the way her father had taught her to choose things, thoughtfully and without apology. The pendant had been with her through all of it. Her father had clasped it at her collarbone the morning she left for her first real job, his hands steady, his face composed, his eyes saying the things he didn't say out loud. A compass rose in gold, small enough to forget you were wearing it, impossible to actually forget. Walter passed on a Tuesday in November, quietly, without drama, in a manner entirely consistent with how he had lived. Renee sat with the sealed envelope for 3 days before she opened it. Kofi was traveling, or said he was, and she was alone at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that went cold while she read every page of the documents twice. She read the numbers, she read the names of the holdings, she read the 40 years of patient, invisible work that her father had done and left for her, like a long letter written in the language of property and equity and careful legal structure. She closed the envelope. She sat with it in the quiet kitchen. Then, 2 weeks later, she found the receipt. The weeks before the gala had a particular weight to them. Not the dramatic heaviness of a crisis, but the quiet, grinding weight of certainty. Renee had spent too many years learning to read situations clearly to pretend anymore that what she was seeing was something other than what it was. Kofi had been coming apart at a seam that he kept trying to hide by pulling the fabric in a different direction. She had watched the pattern for long enough to name it. The resentment had started small, a comment here, a silence there, the way he stopped asking about her work and then stopped acknowledging it, and then started treating her career as a source of personal grievance rather than something to be proud of. She had told herself it was stress. She had told herself he was adjusting. She had made herself smaller in their home to give him room, and the room had not helped because the problem was not space. The problem was that Kofi had decided sometime in the years they had been married that her success was evidence of his failure, and men who believed that about the women they chose had a way of finding something to do about it. The receipt was in the pocket of a coat she had picked up from the dry cleaner on his behalf. A simple errand, the kind of small marital kindness that had long since become unconscious. The reservation was at Peachtree Garden, the restaurant with the low lighting and the jazz quartet on weekends, the place they had gone for their 3rd anniversary. 2 people. A Thursday evening, not a night he had mentioned. She placed the receipt on his nightstand. She did not say a word about it. She watched him see it the next morning and watched the calculation move across his face, a brief, almost invisible renegotiation of his expression. He said nothing. She said nothing. The silence between them had the particular quality of something that had already been decided. She understood then, with the clarity that had been building for months, that the marriage was finished. Not because of the affair in isolation. People made terrible choices in terrible moments and sometimes came back from them. But because of what the affair revealed beneath itself. Tiffany was not comfort. Tiffany was recruitment. Kofi had taken someone into the private structure of their marriage and used her to dismantle it piece by piece, with planning and intention and a kind of contempt that could not be explained away by any honest accounting of their situation. The shampoo. She didn't know about the shampoo yet, not specifically, but she had felt the shift in their home. Small things moved, the bathroom rearranged in ways she couldn't immediately identify. Kofi's attention to her getting-ready routine that had never existed before. She had filed it without naming it. Lorraine had been part of this longer than the affair itself. Renee understood that now with full clarity. The social whispers, the consistent, gentle undermining that had circulated through their family circle for years. Renee was cold. Renee was difficult. Kofi deserved better. Kofi was suffering. Lorraine had been laying groundwork. She had been building a narrative that would make Kofi's choices look like responses to Renee's failures rather than what they actually were. And when Tiffany arrived, Lorraine had welcomed her without a moment's hesitation. She had offered a warmth to that woman she had never once offered to the woman her son had married. Renee sat with all of it, not in paralysis, in preparation. She called the law firm the morning after she found the receipt. She drove to the offices in Midtown and sat across a polished conference table from a man named Gerald, who had been managing her father's estate for 6 years, waiting for her to come forward. He walked her through the structure, the holdings, the assets, across 4 industries, the value that Walter had accumulated over 4 decades of methodical, unhurried construction. She listened to all of it. She asked the questions that needed to be asked and received answers that confirmed what she had already understood from reading the documents alone. Then she asked about Vantage Group. Gerald told her that the acquisition was entirely within her capacity, that the current ownership structure made it straightforward, that it could be completed depending on her timeline within weeks. She said she wanted it done before the gala. Gerald looked at her for a moment, then he said he would begin immediately. The acquisition was finalized on a Thursday morning. By noon, Renee held the ownership documents for the company she had worked at for 11 years, the company that had passed her over, that had taken her ideas and credited them to other people, that had made her prove herself on a loop for more than a decade. It belonged to her now, completely and legally, and without any possibility of being taken back. She drove home. She cooked dinner, the same dinner she had cooked on 100 other Thursdays, the same routine, the same kitchen. She set the table and sat across from Kofi and watched him eat, and watched him perform the normal evening, and watched him be entirely, completely unaware of what had shifted beneath him while he was busy planning her public destruction. She touched the compass rose pendant once under the table. The direction was clear. The ballroom had gone quiet in the way that large rooms go quiet when something fundamental shifts, not all at once, not with a single dramatic sound, but in a spreading, widening stillness that moves through a crowd the way cold moves through water. The music was still playing, the servers still moved between tables, but the conversations had died, and every face in that room was turned toward the same point, toward the woman in the center of it, with her head uncovered and her spine straight and an expression on her face that none of them had a framework for. Kofi had stopped smiling. He was watching her the way a man watches something he thought he had planned for and is now realizing he had not planned for at all. He had expected tears. He had expected the collapse, the hands going to the face, the hurried exit, the humiliation completing itself, the way humiliation was supposed to complete itself, with the target diminished and the audience satisfied, and the person who had arranged the whole thing feeling the particular satisfaction of power exercised. He had wanted her broken in public so that he would no longer have to watch her be whole. But she was not broken. She was standing there with her hair gone and her scalp exposed under those chandelier lights, and she looked like a woman who had known exactly what was in that bottle and had chosen to come to this party anyway. She looked like a woman who had been waiting for this exact room, this exact crowd, this exact moment. He took one step forward. The instinct was not anger. It was the older, deeper instinct of a man who has just understood that he has miscalculated badly and has not yet figured out how badly. Then the lights changed. The room lights dimmed slightly, the way they did before the formal program began. At the front of the ballroom, near the main stage, a podium stood lit and waiting. Bernard Cole, the outgoing CEO of Vantage Group, made his way toward it with the measured walk of a man who understood that his presence itself was a form of communication. The room gave him its attention the way it always did, immediately, completely, the involuntary deference of people who had spent years inside a hierarchy he represented. He thanked everyone for attending. He mentioned the year's results. He said he was proud of what the company had built and what it would continue to build, and that transitions, when they came, were not endings but evolutions, and that this particular transition was one of the most significant in the company's history. He paused. He looked at something off to his left that the audience could not quite see. He said he wanted to begin the evening by introducing someone Someone most people in this room would already know. Someone who had been in this building, in these meetings, doing this work for longer than many of the people standing in this room tonight. Someone who, as of yesterday morning, held a title that reflected what she had always actually been. He said her name. Renee walked to the podium. She moved through the room the way her father had moved through rooms, without hurry, without performance, without anything superfluous attached to her presence. Just the fact of her, moving through space that had always been hers, even when she had been told otherwise. Her head was uncovered. The compass rose caught the light at her throat. She reached the microphone and stood there for a moment before she spoke, not hesitating but settling, giving the room the chance to be fully still before she began. She thanked Bernard, simply, genuinely. Then she turned to the room. She said that Vantage Group had a new owner. She said the acquisition had been finalized the morning before, that the legal transition was complete, and that the leadership structure going forward would be communicated to the full organization in the coming days. She said she was looking forward to the work ahead. She said she was grateful to every person in that building who had worked alongside her through the years, who had done the actual work of building something that mattered, and that she had not forgotten a single one of them. She paused. Her voice did not change when she continued. It stayed exactly where it had been. Steady, even, carrying. She said she also wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the people who had underestimated her, not with bitterness, but with genuine gratitude, because every person who had looked at her and decided she was less than she was had, without meaning to, taught her how much she could endure. And endurance, she said, was how you built something that lasted. She let that sit in the room. Then she looked across the ballroom. She found Kofi in the crowd without searching, the way you find things you have been watching for a long time. She looked at him the way you look at something that used to have a hold on you and has lost it completely. Not with anger, not with satisfaction, with the kind of clarity that comes after a long time of seeing something as it actually is. She said nothing to him. There was nothing left to say. Tiffany's face had changed. The confidence was gone, replaced by the rapid recalculation of someone running numbers that are coming up badly. She had believed she was moving toward something. She was only now understanding what she had actually been standing in. Lorraine's glass had come down. Her practiced social expression had not survived the last 4 minutes. She looked, for the first time in years, like a woman who did not know what to do with her face. Bernard stepped to the microphone after Renee stepped back, almost as an afterthought, and added one quiet administrative note. He said that as part of the standard transition process, all senior personnel contracts at the VP level and above would be subject to review by new ownership, that this was routine, that the review would begin in the following week. Kofi's position was among them. The room did not erupt. There was no scene, no raised voices, no theatrical confrontation. That was perhaps the most devastating thing about all of it. The absolute quiet of it. The way consequence arrived not as a storm, but as a tide, patient, inevitable, entirely indifferent to anyone's feelings about its arrival. Renee stepped down from the podium. She accepted a glass of water from a server beside her. She turned to say something to Bernard and laughed at something he said back, a real laugh, the kind that came from somewhere relaxed. She moved back into the room like a woman who owned every inch of marble she was walking on, because she did. The things that followed did not arrive loudly. They arrived the way everything in Renee's life had arrived, without announcement, without ceremony, simply as the logical and inevitable product of choices that had already been made. Kofi's contract review was completed in 9 days. The evaluation committee had access to 11 years of performance records, departmental metrics, internal feedback reports, and a file of 3 formal complaints that had been quietly managed and shelved during the previous administration. The review was thorough and impartial. The findings were not favorable. His department had missed targets in 6 of the last 8 quarters. His direct reports had a turnover rate significantly above the company average. His most recent performance review, written by a supervisor who no longer worked at Vantage, contained language that had been carefully diplomatic but pointed clearly in one direction. There was a meeting, a document that outlined the terms of his separation, a handshake that neither of them meant. He was out by the end of the month. He went to Tiffany. He appeared at her apartment without calling first, which she noted, which told her more about his state of mind than anything he said in the conversation that followed. He told her about the job. He told her about the contract. He expected something from her: comfort, presence, the particular warmth she had offered him over the past year whenever he had needed to believe he had an ally. She listened. She made him tea. She told him it would be fine, but she was doing arithmetic behind her eyes while she said it. Tiffany was not a cruel person. She was a practical one. She had been drawn to Kofi because of what she believed his proximity to Vantage Group offered her: access to rooms she wanted to be in, relationships she wanted to cultivate, a stepping stone toward the version of her life she was building in her imagination. The affair had not been about love. It had been about leverage. And now the leverage was gone, and Kofi was sitting at her kitchen table, looking like a man who had lost his footing, and she was doing the calculation that determined whether staying beside him served her interests or cost her something she couldn't afford. The calculation did not take long. Within 3 weeks, she had reduced her response time on his messages. Within 5, she had stopped initiating contact. Within 6, she sent him a text that was 3 sentences long. She needed space. She was going through some things of her own. She wished him well, and moved on with the clean efficiency of someone whose heart had never truly been in it. He sat with the phone in his hand for a long time after reading it. Lorraine called. She had been calling more than usual since the gala, not to ask how he was exactly, but to talk through the situation, to help reframe it, to find the version of the story that made Kofi sympathetic and Renee at fault. This was what she had always done, the thing she was skilled at, the architecture of narrative that had served their family's self-image for years. But the people who had once been the audience for that narrative had been in the ballroom. They had seen what had happened with their own eyes. They had watched Tiffany laugh and Lorraine raise her glass, and 300 witnesses were not so easily rewritten. The social circle, built over years of cultivation, contracted quietly and without drama. Invitations stopped coming. The gatherings that had always included Kofi and Lorraine in their natural constellation began to happen without them. Not from hostility, which would have been something to engage with, but from simple and devastating absence. People had reassessed. The reassessment had not been favorable. Tiffany left the city before summer. She had built her identity around movement and opportunity, and she understood instinctively when a location had stopped serving either. She resigned from her consulting firm 2 weeks before she left and did not list Kofi as a reference on any subsequent application. The thing that stayed with Kofi? The thing that surfaced repeatedly in the small hours when sleep would not come was not the job loss, though that was significant. It was not Tiffany's departure, though that had its own particular sting. It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when he was driving across the city for an interview at a company 2 full levels below his previous position, and he passed Meridian Tower on the route, and he looked at the building as he always looked at it, involuntarily, with the particular attention of someone who had spent years telling themselves that building was connected to their identity. The directory panel beside the main entrance had been updated. He saw it from the car, the glass case with the names inside, the same format he had walked past for 5 years without reading carefully. He slowed without meaning to. At the top of the directory, in clean black letters against a white card, was her name. He kept driving. There was nothing else to do. Early mornings had always been the part of the day that belonged to Renee entirely. Before the first call came in and the emails multiplied and the day organized itself into the shaped, manageable thing it became by 8 o'clock, there was a window, 40 minutes, sometimes less, that was genuinely hers. Quiet, still. The particular quality of a morning not yet claimed by anything or anyone. The new house was smaller than the one on Greenview. She had chosen it that way deliberately, knowing that she needed something that felt like a beginning rather than a continuation, something that didn't carry the accumulated weight of a life she was no longer living. It was a good house, good light in the kitchen, a back garden she was learning to use, a kitchen table not unlike the one her father had kept in Atlanta, simple, solid, the kind of furniture that asked nothing of you except your presence. She came downstairs on a Thursday morning in early spring and found the pendant on the table where she had left it the night before. She had taken it off after a particularly long day, a day of meetings and decisions, and the particular mental weight of running something as large as what she was now running, and had set it there before she went to sleep. She picked it up now and held it for a moment in her palm. Gold and small, a compass rose, the same as it had always been. She thought about her father. She thought about the kitchen on Briar Creek Road and the way he sat at the table and the sound of him turning a newspaper page and the quality of the silence he maintained. Not empty silence, not cold silence, but the silence of a man fully at peace with himself and with what he was doing and with the time it was taking. She thought about the envelope. 18 years in a drawer. The promise she had kept, not because she had to, not because she was waiting for a reward, but because she had understood intuitively what her father was actually giving her when he asked her to wait. He was giving her the chance to become herself before she became anything else, to learn what she was made of when everything was riding on her own efforts alone, when there was no safety net she could see, when she had to build from her own foundation. She had done that. She had worked and struggled and been passed over and gotten up and done it again. She had sat in meetings where her ideas were credited to other people. She had written the proposals that earned bonuses for people whose names were on them instead of hers. She had married a man she believed in and watched the belief become complicated and then painful, and then something she had to let go of for her own survival. She had done all of it, and she had remained herself through all of it, and when the time came, she had been ready. Her father used to say that a person's character was not what they showed when things were going well. Character was the thing that survived when everything went wrong and kept going anyway, not bitterness, not the performance of surviving for an audience. Just the quiet, daily choice to keep being yourself, even when the world around you was insisting you were something less. Renee had made that choice every morning for 11 years at Vantage Group. She had made it every evening across the table from a man who had stopped seeing her. She had made it alone in a parking garage before walking into a ballroom where she knew something was about to happen to her. She had stood in the middle of 300 people and felt her hair fall and looked up and made it one more time. The choice to remain herself, to let what she knew steady her, to refuse to give them the collapse they had built the whole evening around receiving. That was the win. Everything else was just consequence. She was not grateful for the suffering. She was not the kind of person who believed pain was a requirement for strength, or that people needed to be hurt in order to grow. She thought about that sometimes, about the women who went through what she had gone through without a $70 billion inheritance on the other side of it, who had nothing waiting except the same quiet determination to keep going anyway. Those women were the actual testament to what endurance looked like. She hoped they knew that. She was simply, clearly, deeply at peace, not the performance of peace, not the performance of having moved on, the actual thing, the interior stillness of a person who has done the work, made the choices, accepted the losses, and arrived somewhere true. She clasped the pendant at her throat. The small, familiar weight of it settled against her collarbone, and she touched it once and let her hand fall. She poured her coffee. She sat down at the table. She looked out through the kitchen window at the back garden, where the early spring was beginning its work. Pale green at the edges of things, light at an angle that was different from winter, the particular quality of a morning that knew it was going somewhere. The day would ask things of her. It always did. There would be decisions to make and people to meet, and the ongoing, complicated work of building something that would outlast any single moment in it. She was not afraid of that work. She had never been afraid of work. She had been afraid, for a time, of being seen and dismissed before she could show what the work was. But that fear had not survived what she now knew about herself. She was Walter Caldwell's daughter. She had kept her promise. She had become something on her own. The morning light was coming in stronger now. She could hear the city beginning outside, distant traffic, a bird somewhere in the garden, the ordinary soundtrack of a day gathering itself into motion. She had a 9 o'clock call she was prepared for, and a noon meeting with the Vantage leadership team she was looking forward to, and 100 other things between now and the end of the day that would ask her full attention and receive it. She was not afraid of any of it. She was not anxious about what she had taken on or uncertain about whether she was equal to it. She had spent 11 years proving she was equal to rooms that were not ready to acknowledge it. The rooms were different now. Everything else was hers. Some people spend their whole lives trying to make you feel small because they're terrified of how powerful you actually are. They will humiliate you. They will plan it. They will laugh about it. They will gather an audience and wait for you to break. But the most powerful thing you will ever do, the one thing that costs you nothing and costs them everything, is refuse. Not loudly, not emotionally, not for attention. Just refuse. From a place so deep inside you, it doesn't even feel like resistance anymore. It just feels like who you are. Renee didn't win because she was rich. She won because they couldn't take the one thing they needed her to lose. Her peace. If this story hit something real for you, then you already understand what she understood. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been underestimated by someone who had no idea what you were carrying? And if you're new here, this channel is for people who don't announce their power. They build it quietly. Subscribe, because the next story might feel even closer than this one.